When most people think of Silent Hill, they probably think of erratically sexy nurses, pyramid-headed buff buster sword wielding big guys, and a foggy town covered in ashes, and we could blame that one on the movie. But what if I told you my favorite game in the series had none of that stuff, was designed from the ground up for a Nintendo console, and psychologically profiles you to the point that you now think someone maybe placed a camera in your room 6 months ago and has been watching your every move and has now commandeered your video game? And since Konami decided to recently give the series a massive shot in the arm by announcing 4 new Silent Hill video games, it feels like the perfect time for me to stand up and shout as loud as possible about the incredibly chilling psychological horror game that is Silent Hill Shattered Memories. I'm Zion from Nintendo Life, and today we're delivering you a look back at Silent Hill Shattered Memories. We're going to be giving you some reasons as to why you should play it yesterday, and I'll tell you why the Wii version is better than the PS2 one.
The PS2 version was a very late addition. It was never supposed to be on PS2. So very late in the day they said, hey, put this on PS2. And we were like, how? Getting our engine to look great on PS2 was a huge challenge. That was 100%, this is canon, that is not the best version of the game.
That was Sam Barlow, the lead game designer and writer on Shattered Memories. We were fortunate enough to sit down with him and have him answer some questions about the game, so he'll pop by with random bits of trivia and developer insight throughout the video. Now, if you're the kind of person that's scared of spooky monster horror, then don't fret, because that is not Shattered Memories' agenda. And even scarier to some people are spoilers. And don't worry, we're going to be staying away from those in this video as well. There's this myth that goes around occasionally that Silent Hill Shattered Memories is a straight up remake of the first game in the series. And while there are a lot of elements borrowed and yeah, there's similarities to be found, the game truly is its own thing. The game is full of brand new ideas and a completely unique story that welcomes fans old and new to take a walk down its silent streets. So let's go back to the beginning to find out where Shattered Memories got some of its inspiration. The year is 1999, and the first Silent Hill just launched worldwide on the PlayStation. The game really dug its claws into critics and players thanks to its ominous atmosphere, nail-biting sound design, impressive cutscenes, and 3D camera controls that hadn't really been tackled in a horror game before then. The story follows Harry Mason, whose trip to the town of Silent Hill for a mini getaway with his daughter Cheryl veers off course after he crashes their car and wakes up to find she's gone missing. And as any good parent would, he sets out on foot, sifting through the snowy setting of Silent Hill in search of her. But what he never could have comprehended are the horrors that would await him. Silent Hill is a true hellscape full of monstrous abominations, strange situations, and characters that Harry will question with every opportunity he gets. And my goodness, does that man love to question things.
Have you seen a little girl around here?
What are you talking about?
What's this?
Harry!
What this?
Just discovered it.
And somehow through all of it, Harry just pushes on, holding his sanity together until the credits roll. Throughout the game, you'll encounter a number of otherworldly monsters that you can either run from, if you're lucky, otherwise you can take them out with different melee weapons and guns, but only if you're careful with how you use your ammo. These weapons, along with a number of healing items and collectibles, can be discovered simply by exploring the nooks and crannies of the town. The game is full of puzzles that'll breadcrumb you from one side of the town to the other, having you constantly referencing your map and backtracking for progress. The game doesn't overstay its welcome either, with a 5 to 10 hour runtime, and depending on how you play your cards, things can play out drastically different in the end as well. And if you decide to go back and play the game again to get a different ending, you can even find new weapons to use against the monsters that stand between you and your daughter. And even in the modern age, Silent Hill is still an intense and memorable game. I highly recommend you check it out if you have the opportunity. But with all the things Silent Hill did right on the PlayStation, there was a lot that could be done with the story and setting with new technology. The original Resident Evil got a from the ground up remake for the GameCube. So why couldn't Silent Hill? Now, if we flash forward to the year 2009, conveniently 10 years after the release of the original Silent Hill, and the world was treated to Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Now, other than a visual novel retelling of the original Silent Hill that released exclusively in Japan on the Game Boy Advance in 2001, this was the first and only time a Nintendo platform ever received a real Silent Hill game. And at the time of making this video, this is still the only one. Shattered Memories borrows little things from the original Silent Hill, like the premise, the main characters, and elements of the town, and uses them kind of like ingredients in a recipe. The developers at Climax Studios took these details and retooled them to make a completely new game that doesn't stand in the shadow of what came before it. Shattered Memories has its own story to tell. Now, I played this game back in the day with some friends, and we were hooked. However, at the time, not everyone that I talked to enjoyed or understood this new direction. The rusty, nightmare-fueled sections of the original had been replaced with a frozen tundra where you were chased by ghouls that you couldn't kill. And sometimes you had to partake in in-game therapy sessions? What is this game, and how is any of this Silent Hill? Let me explain. Shattered Memories still follows Harry Mason, who's on the search for his daughter after crashing his car in the seemingly serene yet snowy town that everyone knows and loves by this point. You'll encounter more characters from the first game, like the police officer Sybil in the cafe. You'll still ask everyone you meet if they've seen your daughter, and you'll run in whatever direction they tell you, even if they've just given you the slightest bit of information. But beyond that, things are far from the same. Firstly, when exploring Silent Hill, the game is always played from a third-person perspective. Harry's movement is smooth and controlled with the analog stick on the nunchuck, and the pointer of the Wii Remote gives you control of the camera. You do sacrifice those unique and intentional camera angles of the original Silent Hill, but this freedom of movement over the classic tank controls is a massive improvement when it comes to gameplay. Those PS1 controls really could get in your way even after you got over the steep learning curve. The Wii Remote pointer also lets you use Harry's flashlight in an incredibly natural way. The shadows and lighting on display are unlike anything else we'd seen on the Wii, and even today it's impressive to go back to, as this was before the time VR and realistic motion controls were a bit more common. You can use Harry's flashlight to solve certain puzzles, but you'll find yourself appreciating it more for how it lets you shine a literal light on the town. It's rare to find a game where every sign, poster, book, and magazine in the game features a different design, direction, or message. It's incredibly rare to see the same detail twice. This depiction of the town truly feels lived in, and as you explore, you'll get to know a bit more about the town and what happened to the people that live here.
And that was like our thing with Shattered Memories, was if we're essentially in a first-person world, the whole gameplay is you're giving the player a camera, right? That's the whole gameplay. All these games, you're moving a camera around an environment. So then telling you, well, don't bother looking at anything though. Like, don't bother stopping and paying too much attention. I mean, but the one that kills me every time is books in games, right? When you go into a room, go into a character's bedroom or a house or a school. I mean, it makes more sense in a school, and you'll see the same 5 books. You'll be like, why does this character need 7 copies of the same book, right? And what does this book even have to do with this character? People will have the same paintings. They live in the same village and they all have the same paintings on their wall. You're like, come on. If the whole point of this game is to slowly walk around, soaking things up and thinking and absorbing story through the environment, like, we have to set a higher bar for ourselves. Like, we have to not repeat things. The whole mission of this game was, we have this ending in mind. There's a story that we're revealing. Like, that should be in every atomic piece of this, right? So we had, to make things easier for the artists, we had a list of image systems across the game. There was one that was like recording memories, right? So obviously the story of the game and the revelation in the game cast some light on the idea of memories and how imperfect or perfect they are. So that was like, oh, taking photographs of things. We have to fill this mall with shops, right? What are the shops going to be in the mall? And it's like, oh, we'll have a photography studio that is about preserving, your family memories and stuff, right? So everything, like you say, shop fronts, names, everything had to, in some way, touch on these things so that they're just drip feeding you, letting you absorb these ideas. And it was a tool then so that, as the artists are going through, rather than be like, I'm going to put some random Dragon Ball Z reference in here, right? Or whatever. They're going to be like, oh, I need to, create something, and they can look at the list and have ideas and spark ideas off of that. I remember there was one, this is another case of me getting annoyed, perhaps not necessarily, but there was, when you're driving through one of the town at one point, there's a lot of shops you go past, and one of them was the Dreams bed store or something, and that ticked our box. And then Konami Legal came back and they said, oh, there is a store called Dream ZZZZ in Michigan, so you can't use that. And I was like, okay, can I have Dreamy? And they're like, no. I was like, well, of course there are mattress stores called Dreamy and Dreams. Nobody is going to think that we are somehow commercially profiting from the existence of this mattress store in Michigan. I can't remember what we called it at the end. Maybe we just added a lot of Z's on it.
Survival horror games are often known for their elaborate puzzles that'll send you searching for items, deciphering riddles, and backtracking regularly if you can't find something. And the Silent Hill series traditionally embraces them as well. But Shattered Memories puzzles can sometimes feel shockingly simple. It can be an extremely rewarding feeling to crack the code on something all by yourself. But here, a puzzle could consist of opening a cabinet using these lifelike motion controls, finding a key, and then unlocking the door. And that's the puzzle. But it turns out this wasn't a lazy decision due to a lack of time. This was incredibly intentional.
I mean, that was definitely a conscious thing. There was this thing that drove the kind of production and exec level people wild, because we'd made Silent Hill Origins, and just even outside of like survival horror games back then, the idea of puzzles was they were a good way to eat up the player's time, right? So when we made Origins, we knew some statistics. We knew that, this sounds crazy, but it's true. Someone who plays a Silent Hill game, something like 40% of their playtime is spent on the map screen and in the inventory screen. You think about those classic games, you're constantly like, where am I going? Pull up the map. Which doors haven't I opened yet? Pull up the map. Oh, what items have I got? Where do I go? I've got a key. That is literally half the game. And as well, we knew that as a rule of thumb, any given like dungeon level in Silent Hill, you would get like an extra hour, generally, of gameplay time from people being lost or having missed an item or just being stuck, right? And then they're just going back and forth looking for stuff. And the money people are like, this is the good stuff. They're like, if you get rid of this, the game's going to be over. Like, what the hell? Like, you can't do that. But to us, we knew that we had this end point in mind. And it was like, if people don't get to the end of this story, it won't mean anything to them. So we want them to make progress, right? So similarly with the combat, it's like we don't want that to become an obstacle. We want people to keep moving forward. But we set ourselves some rules, and I think the rules with Shattered Memories were everything you need to solve the puzzle is in the room. So it's impossible to miss an item. It's impossible to have to backtrack. It's impossible to, be like, I don't think I can solve this puzzle yet because I just randomly did not find the thing I was supposed to find. The point of these puzzles was, I guess loosely this is the same of puzzles generally, but the point was to give you a sense of interaction, a sense of touching the world, which was more explicit on the Wii because you had some of the physical controls. So it's like, to ground the player and immerse the player in this reality, have them feel like they're able to reach out and touch the world, have there be some mechanical interactions with them.
Harry also comes equipped with a cell phone that you can use to pull up a map, take photos, and can even read and send messages and phone calls. Even the save game functions and settings are all baked into this phone. And when receiving calls, the person on the other line can actually be heard through the speaker of the Wii remote. So if you keep your volume adjusted low enough, you can actually put your controller up to your ear and hear them, mimicking the feeling of using a cell phone. It may sound silly, but everything was meticulously crafted and well-intentioned to immerse you in this world.
The start of the development was quite different. So normally, especially if you're like an independent dev working for a publisher or something, normally a game will get signed and then you'll kind of immediately go into production on it and the team will ramp up. And so especially, and I think this, when I speak to other people, this is still the case, even in big AAA games. If you've got like a narrative heavy game, you find yourself building the game as you're writing the story, right? There are famous examples of like Bioshock Infinite, right? Where they just scrapped like a whole chunk of the game because by the time they'd built it all, Ken Levine had decided that didn't actually make sense anymore, right? The beauty with Shattered Memories, because there was a very kind of complicated back and forth with Konami about us doing a new game, and there were various different games they asked us to do, and it kind of took a while. And so ultimately, I feel like it must have been once we knew Shattered Memories as a rough concept was the thing, it ended up taking another 6 months, during which time I was not allocated to a new project. So I spent 6 months designing the game on paper, kind of thinking it all through, like, this is how the mechanics work and how they will intertwine. This is, these are all the key beats of the story. This is how the puzzles will reflect that, thematically how these things will all work. So that, when we came to actually build the game, we had a pretty detailed kind of roadmap.
Now, this may sound surprising, but one of my favorite ways the game tells its story is through its audio diaries. Throughout the game, you'll notice phone numbers on store posters, signs, maybe you'll find one in a crumpled up napkin at the edge of a bar, or you'll discover one through a puzzle. You can then enter those numbers into the in-game phone to make a call to someone associated to the puzzle or that phone number that you just discovered. And in the moment, these calls might not make a whole lot of sense, but eventually they should start to resonate with you and the pieces will fall into place. And this mechanic of finding phone numbers makes it feel like more of a challenge instead of just making these logs an item you can pick up in the corner of a room. It's another way the game gets you to stop and soak in your surroundings.
I always struggle in like sci-fi shooters and stuff where you'll pick up the audio log that's a 3-minute audio log, and so you start walking, listening to it, and turn a corner, and suddenly things are jumping on you and shooting you, and you're like, I'm trying to So then you find yourself picking up the audio log and just stopping and being like, well, I'm going to listen to this knowing that I have to concentrate and I don't want to get jumped on by monsters. So we were quite conscious that when you bring the phone up, you also slow your walking pace down a little bit. So and allowing space around those things, and particularly as well having this clear delineation between nightmare sequences and the spooky exploratory stuff was, if you find a message, you can just listen to it and walk around, and as you're walking around, take in the environment or whatever. Even if people aren't necessarily conscious of it, make it easier for them to make the choice to listen to these things, because it's not fighting the other systems in the game. But as well, like you say, there was an element of trying to just create a little bit of fun to finding these things. Because again, like if you think traditional survival horror, I walk through the spooky corridor, very atmospheric, looks beautiful. Walk into a room, oh, this room looks gorgeous. I walk around, I see a sparkle in the corner. I go over, I click on it, sound of crumpling paper, we go to a UI screen with text, and I have to sit and scroll through the text and then click and come back out again. And it's not like sexy mechanically, and it's hitting up all these issues.
Now, another element of Shattered Memories that's a night and day difference is the combat, which takes the form of these nightmarish segments which sees you chased around by these blank, ghoulish creatures. And instead of seeing the town age and rust into some hellish torture chamber, Silent Hill becomes consumed by ice and everything glows of black and blue. Now, if these creatures get close enough to you, they'll jump on your back, and you'll have to throw your Wii Remote and Nunchuck in the direction they're in to throw them off you. And if you get tackled too many times, you'll have to restart the nightmare over again. Harry isn't equipped with any weapons either, so your only chance of surviving these creatures is to outrun them. And even though you don't have any weapons to defeat them, there are a few things you can use to defend yourself. Occasionally, you'll stumble across a flare that you can use to keep them off your back temporarily. You can also throw down shelves and create obstacles that'll slow them down. Now, to me, the chase sequences have always seemed to be the most divisive part of Shattered Memories. For me, though, these were the moments that got my heart racing the most. Whenever one of these creatures sees you, they'll scream at the top of their lungs to alert their friends of your presence. And while you're running around, you can look behind you to see if any of them are on your trail, kind of like in a racing game. And while you can hide from them in cabinets, it never really feels like you get a chance to stop and breathe. The motion controls can be a bit finicky here and there, but the combination of flailing your arms around and getting mobbed by these ghouls never ceases to freak me out. And these moments in the game don't pop up that often either, so you don't have to worry about feeling overwhelmed by them. And another thing I learned while chatting with Sam is the fact that these creatures almost ended up fairly different than the version we received in the final game.
I was obsessed with the idea of them running on all fours, because I thought that was terrifying. And I kept insisting that we make this work. And this was another thing that was a problem with the 3D camera, because if you're running along and you have these things that are vaguely humanoid running on all fours, they drop out of camera again when you're trying to see them and they're smaller on screen. But I knew that this was really important to me. And then there's also a level, the first level we built, which was I think the first chase sequence. It was really important to me that it had this central swimming pool section. It's really important that you have to run through the swimming pool. At some point, after insisting on all these things, I realized, so when I was 7, between the ages of 5 and 7, I lived in Tanzania. So my dad was a civil engineer and we were out there with this road being built. And this one day, there was a swimming pool that we used to have to drive quite a way to get to. So it's like a treat for us to go to the swimming pool. And one day, little 6-year-old me is playing at the swimming pool, and all the parents are sat around lounging, and a pack of baboons came over this fence and started chasing me around the swimming pool. And the grown-ups, in my memory at least, were all laughing and found it amusing. Obviously, deeply then buried this trauma into my psyche. So I suddenly realized when we were developing the game, and I'm looking at the grey box, and I'm insisting that these things be on all fours and slightly hairy, and they should be chasing the player through a swimming pool. I was like, oh, okay. That's what this is. Maybe it doesn't have to be this way.
And even though these creatures didn't end up as quadrupeds, we can still see a bit of that DNA left over in the cutscene where Harry first encounters these creatures and this nightmare world. And when exploring the regular world of Silent Hill to progress the story and find secrets, you never have to worry about those creatures popping out to attack you either. You could almost say there's a level of trust you can have with the game that kind of lets you take your coat off, relax, and see everything the town of Silent Hill has to offer. In the original 3 Silent Hill games, the story was first and foremost, and this was something that gave those games a different taste than your standard survival horror game. The tales these games tell are often fairly cryptic, but once you get to the root of it all, they can leave you with a profound feeling, maybe a new outlook on an aspect of your life, or maybe you finished and received a bad ending, and in turn, walked away with a salty, negative experience. And even after the massively depressing ending I got when I finished Silent Hill Homecoming back in the day, I still gave Shattered Memories a go, and I am so glad I did. So as I've mentioned before, Harry Mason still crashes his car in the outskirts of the Winter Wonderland Silent Hill. His daughter is missing, and he rushes off quickly to find her. But interspersed in the introduction is a first-person segment where you'll interact with and answer questions from a psychiatrist named Dr. K. He'll ask you some potentially invasive and personal questions pertaining to your life. But if you play the game and pay attention to the opening splash screens where all the logos appear, you'll stumble upon a message that warns you about how Shattered Memories will psychologically profile you as you play. This is a game that plays you as much as you play it. Now, if you've never played this game before and want to experience it all for yourself, this is the part where you walk away. I'm not going to spoil the story of the game, but there's no way that we can't talk about this profiling. Shattered Memories pays attention to every decision you make and pivots accordingly in different directions without you actually knowing. Little things in your playthrough, from someone's outfit to their attitude, or how a scene generally plays out, could look drastically different when compared to someone else's playthrough. There's not a whole lot more I can say about it without giving away too much, and that's actually the way the developers wanted it to be. Sam and his team actually fought hard to keep that information away from the player.
It was, again, the money men would look at it and be like, so you're spending all this money and a given player will only see 30-40% of the content. Is there a way we can tell them? I remember having a meeting with, I think it was maybe Sony, and they had heavy rain out, and they were like, we really want to put a picture-in-picture so that you can see the different cutscenes you've missed because we can see how much money we spent. And I was like, that's a terrible idea. Like, you want it to feel special to you. But I think the thing that is so different now, which, like you say, is completely cool about it, is the more subjective and personal a game is now, the more it makes sense to watch it big streamed, right? If I watch someone play Uncharted for 6 hours on a stream, I have very little incentive to play it myself because it will be exactly the same game. But knowing that everyone has different versions, and because you can share your game online, because you can hit up social media and access Reddit, and just, the community you're part of in playing a game becomes so much larger, that making a game that is unique and expressive and personal like that, suddenly it is actually just a lot easier for people to realize how cool this shit is.
These visits with Dr. K will pop up periodically throughout the game, and as you play, he'll get to know you in strange ways that feel eerily real. He'll always have questions to ask you, but sometimes those questions take the form of activities that utilize the motion controls of the Wii Remote instead. These questions are designed to break down your walls, figure out your morals, and just learn more about you. But let's stop talking about you for a second, and let's talk about Harry and the rest of the cast of the game. In the original Silent Hill, the dialogue is incredibly stilted and awkward. There will be moments in the game where Harry seemingly just isn't fazed by certain events that a normal human would be freaking out over. Part of it is his delivery and even just the lines that he was fed. There's one moment in the original where Harry barely survives a horrific fight with a massive lizard that has a mouth that's split vertically, and after the fight, he's teleported back to a different room and he sees a ghost, maybe, and then it's almost like he forgot about the fight and says the most campy thing.
Huh? What was that? Who in the hell was that? What's...
Harry, no! What in the hell was that, and why did you bring me here? Part of the problem with the dialogue was likely due to the limitations of the hardware, and voicing characters in video games was still pretty new back then. But in Shattered Memories, the characters come off natural and pretty lifelike, especially for the Wii. Nowadays, we have plenty of games that feel real, but looking back at Shattered Memories, you can see how groundbreaking and impressive the characters' performances really were. And as far as the music goes, this was actually the last game that the series' famed composer, Akira Yamaoka, fully worked on as well. So after I recently replayed both the original Silent Hill and this reimagining in Shattered Memories, back to back, I wanted to know why Shattered Memories became such a different game than the rest of the series, especially considering the fact Sam and his team worked on Silent Hill Origins before this. Why didn't they go for a more by-the-books remake?
So my understanding, which is purely from my POV from Portsmouth, England, several steps removed from this whole process, my understanding was, so there was a point where Silent Hill was essentially dead in Japan. I think it was technically after 3 they decided to stop making them, and then they chickened out and decided 4 was going to be a Silent Hill game. And then at some point, the movie happens. So Christopher Gans is going to make a big movie of Silent Hill. So Konami of America says, well, we're going to need a game to go with this, right? We're going to need, come on. But there isn't enough time or money to make a game. So they ended up putting out a UMD for the PSP that had a bunch of Silent Hill stuff on it. That was the best they could manage to hit the launch date of the movie. Off of the fact that the movie was happening and they'd done this UMD, they wanted to make some games. And so I think the very obvious first port of call was they wanted to do I think it was for PSP. Because this is where PSP was going to be, was going to be huge and Sony was really pushing it. So I think at some point they said we should do a remake of Silent Hill 1. It's aged the most, and so I think the idea was to do a remake of that game for PSP, and I believe, as I understand it, they kind of greenlit this idea and then subsequently realized it was too expensive or it was going to be too much to do. So they ended up going with the alternative, which was making a prequel which was Origins, and they tried out some weird ideas on that, and then my team came in and we kind of retooled it. I mean, the idea of a prequel to Silent Hill 1 made zero sense because Silent Hill 1 tells its own story. So when they were like, oh, we should make a prequel, it's like there's nothing to explain. Like there's nothing to see or explain. So their idea was to invent this character, Travis Grady, a trucker. And suddenly like, oh, all along he was actually pivotal to the entire history of Silent Hill. It's just no one ever mentioned him. And kind of undid some of the stuff. And like the version when we took over was very strange. Like it was, it's 7 years prior, but characters looked older. Characters who had yet to encounter the supernatural seemed very au fait with it. It was a lot. But essentially the Silent Hill Origins we shipped in terms of gameplay, atmosphere, locations, aesthetics, music was 75% Silent Hill 1, right? You're revisiting a lot of the same locations. It's all the same characters, and just the gameplay and the aesthetics are very similar. We got to a point, so like I was saying, this whole thing on Shattered Memories where I had 6 months to design the game, that was at the end of a more tortured back and forth, which roughly was something like, we did Origins, we finished it, we shipped it. People reviewing it, a lot of people were saying, hey, this is kind of neat that it's portable, but this specific type of gameplay is quite tired now, right? Like that format, we're seeing Resident Evil 4 reinvent things. And something like Konami came back and asked us if we could do another Origins, like a sequel to Origins or a new like PSP Silent Hill that was similar to it. And I had also, like the Wii was on its way, whatever the codename was, we had like the codename version of it. And I knew that our producer on Silent Hill, who sometimes was quite malleable, had told me over drinks that their dream was to make a first-person Silent Hill game called Brahms PD that would take it to a more mainstream place. So I was like, oh, well, I have these ideas of cool stuff we can do on the Wii. So I pitched him this thing called Brahms PD, thinking I was being smart, right? Taking his idea and just tweaking it so that he would feel like it was his idea. But he read my pitch, which involved some of the psychology stuff, and was like, no. He's like, no, Brahms PD is a straight up shooter. Like what I was imagining is just like, you've turned it into this first person exploratory thing about a detective that's losing his mind or whatever. So that didn't happen. Konami came back a second time and were like, can you please make us another Origins? And the head of the studio, Simon, have vague memories of there being a call and him saying, we don't want to make one of these because it'll get 7 out of 10 again. It is not like raising the profile of the studio. It's not breaking new ground. We're not exactly going to make lots of money from making this game. Like, there's not a lot of incentive for us to do this. And on this call, I believe maybe it was William, was like, well, what if we threw in Sam's Wii thing? Like, why don't we make a Wii game? And you get to do the thing that's the 7 out of 10, then you get to do the fun new thing. So originally the plan was we were doing a PSP game and a Wii game. And so we started reworking Brahms PD to not be about Brahms PD. And that was the pitch that's probably online at some point called Cold Heart, which had a bunch of ideas that Konami and William wanted in there, which was like, oh, if this is on Wii, I'm going to be swinging a stick to hit things, right? So it was still old school combat. Going to be, getting a pipe and donk, donk, hitting monsters on the head with my Wii, which I was not a fan of. At some point, we're still waiting for this thing to be signed. And I think it was William, again, this is all Sam Barlow's subjective memories and versions of the truth. This is my shattered memories. Was like, hey, we got a remake of Silent Hill 1 greenlit years back. If we just turn around and say this is a remake, we can start working on this game real soon. We can get on with this game. And so I think it was decided that's what we were going to do. And my immediate response to that was, although possibly adding some cool Wii controls, the movie exists, and the movie is an attempt to make Silent Hill 1 slightly make more sense and be slightly more palatable, and like the dialogue sounds like things humans would say and stuff, right? And as well to take that aesthetic, up-res it, and bring it into reality, right? So they got rid of the snow and made it into ash because they thought that was cooler. Origins exists, right? Origins is 80% Silent Hill 1. So there is so little ground for us to cover here creatively. Like, if this is a straight-up remake, we're going to be going back to the school again. We're going to go back to the hospital, which has now been visited like 7 times in the games. Like, we got the business reason, but it's like, there's nothing for us to do with this. To which I think William agreed. So then I said, well, how about Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, was really cool. I think this is right timing-wise. So we were like, hey, imagine something like Battlestar Galactica, where they essentially took character names and vague ideas, but completely twisted and rebooted them. We were like, let's do that, but for Silent Hill 1. And for me, that was really interesting because we were kind of talking about doing these things with psychology and like screwing with the player. And so for me, the idea that someone who had played Silent Hill 1 10 years prior, playing this game and having this weird deja vu of like, these beats kind of remind me of the old game. These locations kind of do, these character names, but everything's different. Would 100% plug into this story. Your memories of the original game of Silent Hill 1 are being twisted and turned into something, and we're revealing like the layer of reality. It was also my attempt. I was not the biggest fan of Silent Hill 3. I didn't like the fact they revisited the Harry storyline and some of the choices. To some extent, this was my attempt to, in my eyes, so apologies to people that love Silent Hill 3, but to redeem some of the story of Silent Hill 3 and also redeem the bad ending. So the bad ending of Silent Hill 1, like, I personally hate these kind of alternate endings that don't really coexist in these old games, right? So 99% of people that played Silent Hill 1 will play it one time and they'll get the bad ending. A very small minority of players will go back and replay the game to get the good ending. And I didn't like that as a player. For the majority of people that played that game, they would get this ending, which kind of shat on what they'd achieved. And so I was trying to redeem that. And then at some point, we were still making a PSP game and a Wii game, and the PSP game was supposed to be a completely different game this was like a big thing back then. It was like, if you had both versions, you would see some content that linked the two or overlap, whatever. And at some point, someone at Konami was like, why are you making 2 whole games? Right? Like, that's expensive. Just can be the same game, right? So it then became the same game. But I remember for the vertical slice submission to Konami, very late, we were told, everybody thinks this is a remake of Silent Hill 1. So we can't show anything in this vertical slice that would make them question that truth. Which is fine, because like the opening, I don't know, it's like the opening 40 minutes, you like met the cop, you went to the diner, so it was all loosely the same. And then that became our E3 demo. So what is in the retail version of the game, it probably has like an extra layer of polish and probably a lot of gameplay kind of tweaks and control things and stuff, but that was essentially the vertical slice, which was like, this is the structure of this game. You're going to wander around, explore, do stuff, fiddle with things, meet characters. If you get too close to the truth, shit's going to hit the fan, things will freeze up, you're going to run and scream, and then you'll suddenly be somewhere new. Like, that's what we're proving out here.
Now, as human beings, we're always curious to know if there's any content that was left on the table that didn't make it into the final build of the game. And while Sam did say that most of their plans came to fruition, there was one feature that Sam remembered that didn't make the cut.
One thing we wanted to put in the game that didn't, I can't remember why we didn't, and hurt us with journalists slightly, was, what will happen is a journalist would play through the game, get to the end, and then be like, okay, I'm going to go and play through again to see how different this thing can really be. And then they would play it again, thinking that they were doing the opposite choices, right? But because they didn't know what was actually driving all this content, a lot of times they would like choose a different answer with the psychiatrist, but play the game exactly the same in every other way, and then not get something as different as they're expecting. But we wanted to put a feature in that would take the profile you had at the end of the game, and it would literally create the absolute opposite version of that, and then immediately just seed that into a new game. So you could then play it again and be guaranteed to get everything, the most different version of the game possible. I can't remember. I think maybe we just ran out of time. Maybe that was also a casualty of the PS2 version.
Now, after working on the Silent Hill series, Sam left Climax Studios to work on his own narrative-driven games like Her Story, Telling Lies, and the more recent masterpiece Immortality, which our sister site Pure Xbox gave a 10 out of 10. But a few years back, Sam did tease the idea of returning to the Shattered Memories formula. So of course, I had to ask him about it.
Our spiritual successor to Shattered Memories. We did actually start pre-production on that. But it got paused for reasons outside of our control. But it was a very cool idea. And I don't know, maybe it will get unpaused. But I do this thing where now I've been making these FMV indie game things for a few years. Usually, like the end of the year, I will be on a jury or something for some awards. And so I'll get sent every game that came out this year, like to play and test. And I'll have like 5 days where I'll play through all the big AAA story games, right? And by the end of that week, I'm getting so mad because I'm like, you're still doing this? Oh, like what? I'll have so many opinions. And by the end of that week, I'll be like, oh, I really want to play with this format to explore some of these ideas, which, very consciously Shattered Memories was at the time an attempt to kind of push a bunch of ideas that they weren't seen much. And try, play around with that. So, in retrospect, looking at the design for the spiritual successor thing, it was an almost perfect synthesis of what was cool about Shattered Memories and what was cool about Her Story and Immortality and stuff. In it was very nicely meshing the sense of freedom and kind of non-linear exploratory stuff that is in these FMV games. We were really focused on the one thing that I don't think anyone has ripped off from Shattered Memories. Like there is stuff in Shattered Memories that, the running away from enemies, a lot of people doing that now, the kind of immersive, seamless environment stuff that at the time we were pushing quite heavily. A lot of games do that now. Most games do that. We don't have loading screens. We don't have this. Oh, instead of pulling a map screen out, I'm going to, see it in game, whatever. A lot of that stuff's happening. Obviously the idea of a story with this kind of framing layer and that cleverness, you see a lot of that these days. Even like Until Dawn, like explicitly, literally had that psychiatrist thing. But the one thing that no one has touched, which actually I think was the thing I found most interesting, was the way we used the psych system to actually change everybody's games experience. So the way that the story, character appearances, environment details, everything was dynamically assembled based on how you were playing. So that, one person would play and they would get an extroverted version of Michelle in a red dress, singing on stage and then doing XYZ, and someone else would get a completely different version of Michelle, and they'd go off and then end up in a different location. And all of these things were kind of incremental so that you got, different kind of very kind of customized versions of it. And obviously most games that have alternate content, it's very explicit. Oh, do you want to kill the peasant or save the peasant? Are you going to save this character or this character in The Walking Dead? Oh, are you going to jump into the helicopter and fly off over here, or are you going to run back into the woods or whatever, right? And it's always very explicit, and it's always very binary. But that thing in Shattered Memories of actually a lot of this is below the surface. It's all happening around you as you play, and the degree to which things could change and be customized, and how it wasn't really necessarily about causality. It was much more about kind of a more intimate, subjective version of the game. Like the game is rolling a unique version of the game for you as you're playing it. We are doing a lot with that, having some fun with that. So we'll see what happens. We're getting close to the point of the year where I play all the games again at the end of the year. And that's always the danger, because that's always the bit where I'm like, damn it, I'm just going to find $20 million somewhere. Just going to look under my sofa and just go make one of these goddamn character action games and show people Like, you don't have to do this, this, and this. Oh, wouldn't it, be more interesting if you did this?
Everyone has a different reason as to why they like to play these kinds of games. My mom enjoys them for the creepy monsters and the fact that they don't often jump scare you. One of my best friends, Evan, loves the sound design and the atmosphere. For me, it's always been about the story, and the one told in Shattered Memories is one of the strongest in the series. This game took a chance against the odds, fought back against those that didn't understand it, and the genre is better for it. So if someone calls you out while you're walking down the street and says, "Hey man, nice Silent Hill shirt. Just make sure you stay away from that Shattered Memories stuff. It'll really mess with your head." Don't listen to them. They're just grumpy Pyramid Head isn't in this game, and trust us, he belongs in Silent Hill 2. Give Shattered Memories a chance, and if you can, make sure you play the Wii one, as it's the way the developers intended for you to play the game. Now, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, I just want to say thank you. This video was originally supposed to be something a lot smaller. I wanted to replay Shattered Memories and put out a quick video talking about it. And after interviewing Sam and realizing how this was all going to shake out, the scope just grew and grew, and it took a lot longer than I hoped. But I'm happy with how things turned out. So I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now be sure to let me and the rest of our community know if you've ever played Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Did you play it back when it came out? And did you encounter it in more recent years? Let us know how you enjoyed it. Do you have any special memories to share? Jot them down in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this, then why don't you ask that subscribe button if they've seen your daughter walking around anywhere. And then ring that notification bell to be notified whenever we put up a new video. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you to Sam for taking the time to chat with me. I'm Zian from Nintendo Life. Stay safe out there, and we will see you all next time. Harry, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry, man. I just want to go home. Can we just go home?